We're so happy to have Dr. Salas and Allison with us today. And I'd like to tell you about just a little bit, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of information that we can apply to our experiences and backgrounds at Rice. I'll start with Dr. Salas, who I don't think sleeps. He has a 118-page curriculum vitae, so he must be consulting and writing every spare moment. So I'll tell you a little bit about him. He received his Bachelor's of Arts degree in General Psychology from Florida International University. He received a Master's of Science degree in Industrial Psychology from the University of Central Florida. And then he earned his doctorate in Industrial Organizational Psychology from Old Dominion University. Currently, he is the department chair for psychological sciences at Rice University, and has a long list of responsibilities. He is also the professor of Allyn R and Gladys M Cline Chair of Psychology, responsible for leading graduate courses in organizational science and human factors, mentor, advisor, research manager. Did I tell you I don't think he sleeps? He is a very busy man, and he has, as an assistant, an equally busy Allison Traylor. See her here. I noticed that when some of our members were talking about being their experiences in STEM at Rice, you were shaking your head, yes. So she's had some experiences along with us. She received her BS in Business Administration and Political Science, graduating summa cum laude, honors in management from Northeastern University in Boston. And she is currently in Industrial and Organizational Psychology. She received a master's in Industrial and Organizational Psychology from Rice in fall of 2019, and she's expected to have completed her PhD in this year, 2021. She, I'm just going to read you some of this experience. She was a finalist for the Graduate Teaching Award for Independent Instruction here at Rice. She's Doctoral Consortium Travel Award, Southern Management Association, Graduate Research Fellow, National Science Foundation, Social Science Travel Award here at Rice, and on and on. So she's on the fast track to never sleep. She's going to, has listed as a funded grant with Dr. Salas entitled, When Teaming Discriminates, a series of studies examining team discrimination by gender in STEM teams and a way forward. And I feel like there's a great deal of interest in this subject, and we'll hear about it from them today. You're on, Dr. Salas.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully, everybody having a good day. Yeah. Karen, thank you for that introduction. Thank you for your kind words. So let's get going, since we have about 40 minutes or so. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk for about maybe 10, 15 minutes, give you a sense of the context of what we're studying through the NSF grant that Allison will describe. I'll talk a little about the science of teamwork and what do we know. Again, kind of to set the context for what Allison will talk about. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. And when I'm done with my part, then Allison will do that. Let me see if this works. Can you see my screen? All right. So in case you're wondering, I've been at Rice for 5, 6 years. Spent 30 years in Orlando at the University of Central Florida before I moved here. I'm originally from Lima, Peru, in case you're wondering. So hopefully by now you got used to my accent, which won't go away in the next 40 minutes. So hopefully you'll. A very short agenda. I'll briefly showcase what we know about the science of teamwork. Again, to put into context the study that Allison will describe. And kind of the first message is there is a science of teamwork that has emerged over the last 35 years or so. And I'm going to give you a sense of what do we know in why you should care about teamwork and who cares about teamwork. So who cares about teamwork? And, you know, there were actually 3 or 4 reasons why I decided to move from Orlando to Houston. And the first reason is because there's a lot of interest in the community here around teamwork. And let me describe that very quickly for you. The number one industry that cares about teamwork is the military. So actually, I started my career in the military. I worked for the Navy for 15 years before I became an academic. And all I did was study team performance, teamwork, and team training. So military till today is number one. The second industry that really cares about teamwork is the airline industry. And you hope that when we can travel again, freely, when we can travel again, that the cockpit crew has been trained in teamwork, because 60 to 80% of the mishaps or accidents in aviation are due to poor communication, poor coordination. So all the airlines institute some form of team training to their crews. So the aviation industry is a. The third industry that you may want or not hear is, and the first reason I decided to come to Houston is healthcare. So across the street from us at the Texas Medical Center, there's really an obsession with teamwork. And the reason is, again, you may not want to hear this, but in 1999, the Institute of Medicine issued a report that basically said about 100,000 people die in hospitals due to medical errors. In other words, poor coordination, communication between the care providers. The bad news is that in 2015, another report came out and basically said that the estimate was that 250,000 people die due to medical errors. So since I've been here the last 5, 6 years, I've been working with the Texas Medical Center, the Baylors, the MDAs, Texas Children Methodists, and so forth, trying to improve teamwork and therefore reduce medical errors. The other industry that is very much interesting here in Houston is the oil and gas. So, which I've done some work with. And the reason is, thank God we don't have many of these, but every time there's a hurricane that comes through the Gulf of Mexico, the oil and gas industry has to evacuate very quickly hundreds of people through helicopters and the like. And then after the hurricane passes, then they have to bring it back real quick. So the oil industry is very much interested in this. And the third reason I came here also is NASA. And I'll say a little more about that. But NASA now if we, I'll say this very quickly, if we go to Mars in 2035, we're going to send a team of 4 individuals. There'll probably be 1 female, it will be multicultural. And so teamwork, team cohesion is it's much a concern to NASA for the success of the mission. So there's a lot of research. We have a number of grants with NASA looking at that. I'll say more on that in a minute. So why do you care about teamwork? For the last 40 years now, this science has been studying real teams with real experts in real environments. So this is a lot of field work. So most of the data that I collect, it's in the field. I go to the cockpits, I go to the ORs, I go to the simulations where they train the astronauts. So we do very little laboratory work here at Rice. Most of the stuff is out there. So now after 35 years, we have very compelling data that if teams exhibit good teamwork processes, and I'll define that in a minute, the performance improves. Since I told you there's an obsession with teamwork in the healthcare, I did a big quantitative study, and basically quantitative study of medical team training, and we found that those hospitals that deploy team training, in other words, those hospitals there, they train the healthcare providers with teamwork. We found 2 things. The hospitals that do training teamwork, medical errors are reduced by 18%. And more importantly, the hospitals that deploy teamwork, their mortality is reduced. So here we have a connection that teamwork leads to saving lives. In the corporate world, there's also been a lot of interest in collaboration, and we're beginning to find that organizations that engage in collective performance, good collective performance, their revenue increases. So very quickly, what do we know? Again, a lot of interest, a lot of investment till today in trying to understand teamwork. Here are some of the teamwork failures. I could tell you that in the first bullet, the USS Vincennes, some of you might remember this, we shut down by mistake an Iranian Airbus. I was working for the Navy at the time, and this incident propelled the US Congress at that time to provide lots of resources, lots of money to invest, to try to understand team decision making under stress. So a lot of the data that I'm going to summarize for you here comes from that big boost of resources to understand teamwork. But you can see here a number of the failures. And of course, we have had some successes. The Miracle on the Hudson. If you saw the movie Sully and saw some of the interviews, the first thing he said when he was interviewed is that teamwork helped them and save the aircraft and the people inside the airplane. And of course, now NASA is investing in this, trying to understand how this group of this team of 4 will essentially endure a journey of 30 months. It's going to take 10 months to get to Mars, 8-9 months to live there, study, do research, and then 10 months to come back. So this team for 30 months or so need to be cohesive. They need to get along with each other, and they're going to live in a very confined environment. And so we're doing lots of studies with astronauts about how to improve, how to develop and boost teamwork. So like I said, there are a lot of things that we know. And now with the pandemic, there's been everybody at home, everybody working virtually. So virtual teams is now the big item. If there's not a day that goes by that I get a phone call around how to improve virtual teamwork, how to ensure that virtual teams trust each other, communicate better, and those kind of things. And so, There's a big interest now in collaboration across many industries, some which I already illustrated to you. And this 35 years or so of research, 30, 40 years, and now we know what effective teams do, think, and feel. And I'm going to give you a checklist here, the top 10 things that effective teams do, think, and feel. And all of this is evidence-based, so this is what the science really tells us. So the number one killer, actually, of teamwork, believe it or not, is the lack of clarity of roles and responsibilities. Who's supposed to do what with whom? It's incredible that this simple activity, a lot of managers, a lot of team leaders they don't clarify who's supposed to do what. Effective teams have a very compelling purpose, a reason to be a team. They share and value the vision. They have good team leaders. We call it coaches, because what the good coaches do, they promote, they develop, they reinforce teamwork. Another thing that we know effective teams do is they have psychological safety. Psychological safety essentially is you have the license to speak up without feeling that you're gonna be punished for saying what you think. So in healthcare, this is the biggest problem. How do you create psychological safety so that people like nurses with a lower status can question what the physician or the surgeon is doing? So psychological safety is the big challenge in healthcare. And I can tell you that that's what the Texas Medical Center is trying to fix to increase psychological safety. Effective teams have norms or conditions that people know, that are clear, they're appropriate. In our science, we say effective teams have a shared understanding or a shared mental model. They're in the same sheet of music. And when you have a shared understanding or a shared mental model, you can anticipate the needs of your teams or your teammates. So you pass information without teammates requesting it. Effective teams are correct. They debrief. They reflect on the performance that just happened, and they learn, hopefully, and improve. One of the things that we know from the communication front is that more communication is not necessarily better. In fact, better communication is better. And one of the things that we know is it is the sharing of unique information that matters. So what we have is a lot of teams get bogged down talking about the same thing over and over and over. When somebody ought to say, time out, who has some details or who has some information that we have not discussed yet. So sharing unique information matters. I'm going to go quickly here to pass the baton to Allison, but let's give you a sense of there's a lot of information, a lot of things that we know. We know what influences teamwork. Here are a few of those things. We know that task work is different than teamwork skills. So task work are those things that you need to know in order to do your job. So the first rule actually in teamwork is you cannot be a good team member if you don't know your own job. So the first requisite is you have to know your own job. You have to have task work skills. But task work skill is necessary but not sufficient for effective team performance. You need teamwork skills, which is about how do you coordinate, how you communicate, how you synchronize information. Here another, I'm not going to go through all of these, but this gives you an idea where we have ample evidence, a number of studies that have shown that shared mental models matter, time matters, how do you resolve conflicts matter. And I will end with this very quickly here. Let me walk you through all this. So the science essentially has evolved and matured to an extent that there's a wealth of information out there. So with my colleagues, we have proposed this heuristic, the 7 C's of teamwork. So you have to worry about capabilities, about the people, the right competencies. Cooperation is about the mindset. I like being in a team. I want to be in a team. Coordination is about behaviors. who's going to back me up, what roles and responsibility, it's about role clarity. Communication is about the information exchange, and I already talked about shared mental models and these things. But I gave you this, so this is how the science has organized a little bit the wealth of information that we have. So I know this has been a lot of information very quickly, but I just wanted to give you a sense. There's so much going on, and in this community, in RISE is at the center of it. We're doing a lot of this work that, as I told you, is very impactful and can save lives. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Allison, and I'm going to stop sharing, right, Allison?
Yes. And I will start.
All right.
With the same presentation, but off from a different point. So hello, everyone. I am very excited to be here this afternoon. I was nodding along to a lot of your anecdotes about kind of being in a STEM major or in engineering during your time at Rice, because those stories or anecdotes really kind of matched up with what I have been interested in studying over the past almost 4 years now that I have been at Rice. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you today, first I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of broadly some of the things that we have found from studying teams at Rice's Oshman Engineering Design Kitchen, otherwise known as the ODEC. I'll be talking about the ODEC throughout this presentation, and that's what I'm talking about. And that's kind of a space where students at Rice who are engineering majors, typically mechanical engineering or civil engineering, things like that, kind of come together for these capstone courses at the end of their time at Rice. So they take everything that they've learned about engineering to work on these kind of capstone final projects together over the course of their senior year. And our lab has been studying these teams at the ODEC for several years now. What I'm going to be sharing with you first is findings from kind of earlier studies that we did at the ODEC that were really focused on kind of leadership in these teams and how do we kind of help the students working on these teams become effective leaders in their teams. And then I'm going to transition to talking about what I'm really most excited about, which is our kind of ongoing work at the ODEC and with Rice alumni actually as well, looking at gender discrimination and discrimination in engineering teams. So the first finding that I wanted to share with you all, and these are kind of little nuggets of information about how these teams at the ODEC work together, is that learning orientate with these teams. So leader emergence, we think about as kind of the person who is seen as a leader when there's not a formally assigned leader. So a lot of times in the workplace, you might have a manager who is formally assigned as a leader and everyone automatically looks to their manager as the team's leader. But these ODEC teams at Rice are really unique in some ways, although we see this in the workplace too, in that they don't have a formally assigned leader. So we were interested in kind of understanding who emerges as a leader and who's kind of seen as a leader when they're not assigned. And we found that learning orientation are individuals' kind of tendencies to be interested in understanding new things and kind of being excited about learning tends to predict whether they will emerge as a leader on their teams. But this one can kind of backfire. So what we find is that leaders on these engineering design teams who are too high in learning orientation can actually negatively impact the psychological safety of their teams. So I think I saw something in the chat box during Ed's presentation about kind of in tech, people or in engineering, people may not be great at promoting psychological safety. And that's what we kind of have found, is that there's a little bit of a know-it-all effect. So it's good to be excited about learning and excited about what you're doing. But when you're a little too much, you actually can create an environment where people don't feel safe to speak up. The next finding or the next thing that we tended to find in these teams was that extroversion, or kind of how outgoing, or kind of how much you enjoy kind of interacting with other people, predicts leader emergence at the beginning of these engineering design projects, but not necessarily as you go on throughout the semester. So the person on the team who is outgoing tends to take charge initially, and people will look to them as the leader. But later in the semester, as the project goes on, leaders tend to emerge for other reasons. So for example, at the beginning of the project, the person who is kind of the loudest, the most outspoken, might be the person who teammates are looking to as the leader of their team. But as the semester goes on, we care a lot more about things like technical competence and kind of our satisfaction with the quality of your work, things like that. The third thing we tend to find is that the leader of a team tends not to change throughout the project. So even though it can change, so I just talked about one reason why who we look to as a leader might change as we work together. We do find that whoever emerges as the leader at the beginning of the project tends to remain the leader for the end of or throughout the project. So this can be good or bad depending on the characteristics of whoever is the leader. But we suggest, and when we work with senior design teams at Rice, we talk to them about kind of the benefit of sharing leadership responsibilities, or kind of thinking about how to switch up leaders as the semester goes on, so that you can kind of reap the benefits that different team members would bring as the team's leader. Next, we find that perseverant team members tend to make effective leaders. So, and this kind of gets, I think resilience is a really big kind of hot button issue right now. But what we find is that leaders who tend to persevere toward their goals despite any challenges that they face, so leaders who are more resilient, tend to be more effective as leaders on these engineering design teams as well. And then another one of our findings was that effective leadership in general predicts psychological safety. So this one is a very robust, kind of well-grounded finding that we find across contexts. So not just in engineering design teams, but what we find at the ODEC and in these engineering design teams is that even when there's not a formally appointed leader, so even when it's just a bunch of students working together, whoever the team members see as the team leader really has a big impact on the psychological safety of their teammates. So whether their teammates feel safe speaking up, whether their teammates feel safe kind of disagreeing with the leader, all of those kind of things are part of psychological safety. And what we found in this study about psychological safety too was that we expected that team members' personalities might have an impact on psychological safety, or kind of the way people are. We think about, personality clashes sometimes being an issue in teams. But what we found is that really what matters most is no matter what your kind of individual tendencies and dispositions are, what really matters is how you're behaving in your team's context, and kind of thinking about, and we've kind of extrapolated this finding to think about how these seniors on these senior design teams can create more inclusive or psychologically safe environments on their teams. So those were kind of nuggets that we have from the years that we've spent studying these engineering design teams, and kind of stemming from that, when I came into graduate school, so it's been, I'm in my 4th year now, I was really interested in kind of thinking about how the role that teams play in retaining women and other individuals from other underrepresented groups in STEM. And the ODEC was a really great context for this. And as I mentioned, our lab had been studying the ODEC for a number of years, but what we were looking at and what we were finding was kind of thinking about how these teams work together broadly, and not specifically focusing on gender as much. And so some of you may know this, but RICE is a unique context to study gender in engineering teams. I believe about across all of the engineering majors, I believe about 30% or a little more of RICE engineering students are female, which is very high. It's still not, we're still not at parity, but it's very high compared to kind of other engineering departments at other schools. And we know that we have this problem in engineering with the pipeline. So what we see is that we're losing women from the engineering field in elementary school. Women are less interested, or little girls are less interested in science or pursuing science, even that early on. In high school, we see it. In college, we see it in terms of who's choosing what majors and who's staying in their majors. We see this issue persist throughout the career. So in early career and then later phases of the career, we see women continue to drop out of the STEM pipeline. And a lot of the research, there's been a ton of research done on this issue. So the National Foundation, or the National Science Foundation, does a lot of work to kind of track retention in STEM and kind of understand what's going on there. But a lot of this work is focused on organizational factors, so kind of a level up from teams, and then individual factors. So with the organization, we'll think about things like, what impact does organizational leadership have on retaining women in STEM? In college, what impact does having a female instructor in your STEM classes have on whether you stay in STEM? And at the individual level, we can look at things like kind of resilience, maybe your family's background. So what impact does having parents who studied engineering have on whether you stay in STEM? But we were really missing this kind of this in between of what's going on kind of in the day-to-day, and particularly as we're working together on teams in a STEM context. And so we were really interested in thinking about kind of, I guess I should mention too, that in engineering, one of the big focuses is on teamwork. So Ed talked about a lot of industries, healthcare, aviation, the military, where teams are really important. And we've seen kind of the interest in teams really go up in the engineering world over the past couple of decades. The ABET, which is the accreditation agency for engineering, requires that students work in teams during their undergraduate degrees to be kind of an accredited engineering program. And so teams are really important in STEM. They're a really important part of the day-to-day experiences of women who work in STEM, but we didn't know very much about how these experiences working in teams kind of impacted women on these teams. So we do have a lot of research on team diversity. So there's a lot of interest from industrial organizational psychologists on kind of what does gender diversity or age diversity or personality diversity have on team outcomes. So how does team diversity impact team performance? How does it impact how people are working together? But this research is really focused on team outcomes. So how is the team performing? How is the team working together? And not as much on how teams are impacting the people working on those teams. So we were really interested in kind of in this engineering context where this is really important, understanding kind of the impact that having a very positive experience working on your team or a very negative experience might have on your career outcomes. So to kind of get at this, we started thinking about this concept that we've been referring to as team discrimination. So thinking about what happens when team members are excluded from decision-making on their team, what happens if you are kind of left out of communication channels or kind of left out of the loop, what happens if you don't receive any help when you need help when you're working on a project together, but your other team members do. And the reason that, or kind of the impetus for understanding these things and looking at them was actually from some interviews that I conducted a few years ago with recent alums from Rice in engineering. And when I was talking to them, I was asking them about their experiences at Rice and in the workplace, kind of working on engineering teams. And these are the types of things that they were mentioning, kind of having a negative impact on them and making them question their decision to enter STEM or to enter their careers, or even their decisions to leave STEM after they had graduated, or leave engineering after they had graduated Rice with an engineering degree. So we started studying this kind of team discrimination, or this exclusion from your teamwork in the context of these ODEC teams. And what we expected to happen was that we would see that team discrimination would be bad for teams and for their team members. So we expected to see that teams, the way that teams kind of feel and think, so affect and cognition about working together would be worse if there were high levels of this discrimination going on in their teams. We expected to see lower team performance. And at the individual level, just like we would see with interpersonal discrimination when kind of your boss discriminates against you or a coworker is discriminating against you, we expected to see kind of lower self-esteem or kind of negatively impacted well-being outcomes, kind of intentions, higher intentions to quit, and at the individual level, kind of worse perceptions of your team if you experienced this exclusion. So you might trust your team less, or you might feel less psychologically safe. And we've begun to collect this data from teams at the ODEC. And what we're finding is that what we expected tends to be true. So team discrimination tends to have a negative impact on team members' impressions of their own career and perceptions of their team. So for example, we found that individuals who experience discrimination in their team report lower feelings of trust in their team, and lower intentions to stay in engineering. So this is senior design teams at Rice. We find that people who are excluded from their senior design project report lower intentions to stay in engineering, kind of after having that team experience. We also find that team discrimination leads to lower team performance. So we find these negative impacts on individuals, but then we also find that there's kind of this negative impact on how the team performs, which is what an organization might care, or especially care about beyond kind of retaining people in STEM. But one surprising finding, or kind of lack of support for a finding, was that the effects of team discrimination were not worse for women. So one of the things that we expected was that if women experience discrimination, they might report even, or if they experience kind of this exclusion, they would report even lower levels of trust than, for example, a male student who was also excluded from their team. But we didn't find this to be the case. We also actually didn't find women in our study they had a slightly higher tendency to experience discrimination than their male counterparts, but it wasn't statistically significant. And so we're interested in kind of digging into this more. We suspect that there might be actually a Rice effect here. So by the time you get to your senior year in engineering as a woman, you have kind of put up with all of this stuff that people are doing in kind of exclusionary behavior, so you're able to overcome it more easily, something like that. Interested in hearing thoughts if people have any. But these are kind of the findings that we have so far. And what we're next interested in these studies is kind of thinking about how we can reduce the effects of discrimination or reduce whether discrimination is occurring in these teams. So we're going to be looking at kind of organizational inclusion climate. So to what extent do I feel included in my organization? Does that help kind of buffer me from the negative effects of discrimination? We're going to look at leader inclusiveness, and then kind of differences between female team members to try to get at what makes some team members more resilient or more or less likely to experience discrimination in their teams. So with that, that's kind of where we're going with that project, but we would love to answer some of your questions about what we've been working on related to teams, and hear some of your thoughts as well. I'm going to try to unshare my screen.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. One directed at me had to do with evaluations of team accomplishments, how difficult it is to change the corporate culture. It is difficult, but it's doable. And I can tell you in the last 10 years or so, actually more, maybe 15 years, the healthcare, for example, is trying to transform itself to be a more collective, more teamwork-oriented industry. It's going to take them a while. The aviation industry took 25 years to change its culture for a more teamwork-oriented. And it had to do with, I'll give you very quickly the anecdote. I have worked for the airline, just about all the airlines in the US and in some in the world. The captains realized that they had to engage in trying to understand teamwork, because if the plane goes down, they go down with the plane. In healthcare, the only one that goes down is the patient. So it's been a little more difficult time to engage, especially physicians, by the way. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but physicians are the ones who are still pushing back on this issue. But there's some good news. I've been to some healthcare systems, including some here in Houston, where, man, they're doing everything they can to shift the culture to be more collective oriented. And Allison, there's a question on metrics.
Yep. So we had a question on, were any of these metrics investigated in the context of race or ethnicity in addition to gender? So yes, we had similar findings for race and ethnicity. So we looked at all non-white students, and then we looked at people from underrepresented minority groups. So in STEM, that's defined as Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic students. And we had similar findings to gender. So we saw, I think, a slightly bigger effect. So there were kind of slightly more negative impacts on non-white students than on females compared to males. But it also, if I am remembering correctly, was not statistically significant. But that's something that we want to get into more, is kind of looking at race and ethnicity as well, and also the intersection between those two. So that is kind of that's an interest broadly of industrial organizational psychologists, is understanding more about kind of questions around intersectionality and what happens when you are in a part of a racial or ethnic group that is underrepresented in STEM, in addition to being female. But that research is kind of difficult to do because you have to kind of break things apart into different groups. But yes, we have looked at those. We're finding similar things for race and ethnicity.
Let me add something. I get when I give talks across the country, I often get asked who are better at teamwork, who are better teammates, males or females. Don't blame me. I'm just reporting the facts, by the way. In general, females are better at teamwork as long as the leader is a male. And I'll leave it like that. Because there is, especially in healthcare, there's a number of studies, by the way, that have shown that when you have all female teams, it's a problem. But So anyway, I get asked that question a lot, so I just throw that out for you to think about.
Yeah, we had another question about whether there had been research into the differences in generations in response to exclusion or discrimination. That's a really good question, and I don't know about that, or I don't know of any studies that look at generation. However, my suspicion is that what you see is based on kind of the interviews that I did with early career kind of Rice alums working in STEM, was that I think maybe as you kind of go throughout your career, so it's less of a generation, it's less of, you know, baby boomers are like this and millennials are like this, and more just as you go throughout your career and kind of grow older and kind of gain more experience, you might be more resilient to these experiences of discrimination than you are earlier in your career. And you also see people who are kind of fed up with the discrimination that they're experiencing leaving the field because they're kind of over it.
Yeah, the only generational thing I know is Google did a study of their teammates, of their teams, members who were less than 35 years old. And they found that their teams were, and they use this phrase, together alone, that their teams were together alone, which means that the current generation is much more collaborative because they play games, you know, all over the world, that kind of thing, but that they lack some of these skills that we're talking about here, some of the, you know, how to exchange information, how to create psychological safety, those kind of things. So Google, Amazon, some of the big tech companies are trying to figure out what is it that what is it that makes their teams effective. And in one big study that Google did, by the way, the #1 factor was psychological safety.
So we had another question. For the ODEC teams, does everyone get the same grade, and could the team performance review process, person by person or as a whole, affect team discrimination? So for the purposes of our study, everyone on the team had the same grade or kind of the same performance metrics. So we were looking at performance of the teams overall instead of individuals. I'm not actually 100% sure about in the class if you got a separate grade kind of as an individual. That might have been the case, but that was not what we were looking at in our study. But in terms of could the team performance review process affect team discrimination? So I think that the answer to that is yes. There's some research about kind of finding gender differences or kind of discrimination in performance review processes, or in how we kind of rate peers on different metrics at work. And I think that could definitely come into play in teams, especially in the workplace, if part of your performance evaluation is based on your supervisor or your peers' ratings of each other. That could definitely be negatively impacted by or impacted by discrimination.
There's a question about mentorship. Yeah, mentorship matters. It works. When in our field, we call it coaches. You know, when a leader or somebody acts like a mentor coach, we know it works.
So
okay, that's yours, Allison.
Yeah, I was going to say, I see this question. What would you tell a female freshman at Rice who wants to go into STEM work as to what are her best choices? So this is, like I mentioned, a few years ago, I did several interviews with women who had graduated from Rice recently. It was in the past 3 years or so, and who were working in engineering. And I think some of the anecdotes that were shared earlier kind of got at this as well. But one of the areas that I think, or at Rice, the kind of, it depends on what you're looking for in engineering, and you should do what you're most interested in, I think. But in terms of discrimination and where you're likely to experience discrimination, from my understanding and kind of interviewing these people. I think at Rice, the chemical and biomolecular or biological engineering, or the chubby, which what we were talking about earlier, that is, I believe that there are a fair number of women in that major at Rice, but women who entered chemical engineering fields tended to talk about kind of interfacing with male colleagues, like working on oil rigs or something like that. And the environment and climate was a lot harsher. And I even talked to one alum who had talked about kind of moving into, she had graduated from Rice with a chemical engineering degree and wanting to move into computer science because the people that you interface with as a software engineer are user experience designers and graphic designers, and it's a more welcoming climate. So I don't have a perfectly scientific response to that, but I do think that looking at not only kind of the gender breakdown or the inclusive climate of a major at Rice, but also thinking about what you want to do after you graduate and kind of how inclusive that field is or what that field looks like demographically can make a difference.
Does playing sports contribute to good teamwork in the future? Yeah. There's a number of studies on that. Actually, in sports psychology, they study that a lot. They look at essentially, are you collective oriented after playing sports? Collective orientation is another variable that we study. Collective. So all of us in this Zoom, all of us, we have a disposition. Either you're collective oriented, you like being in teams, you value being in teams, or you're egocentric, you know, a lone wolf, basically, quote unquote, which I'm sure nobody in this Zoom is. But, and so there's a lot of interest that has come out recently about how do you select for teams. And the variable that, or the construct that we look for is, are you collective oriented? Again, do you value being teams? Do you seek in the input from others and those kind of things? So a lot of industries, including healthcare, are trying to come up with a test that that can diagnose whether you're going to be a good teammate or you're going to be collective oriented. But one of the things we know is that you are, if you play sports, collective oriented sports, not singles in, I'm going to make this up, tennis or something like that, but your collective, it does predict team performance. It predicts the likelihood that you'll be a good teammate.
We had a question too about BSA scouting, which I think is Boy Scouts of America scouting, has recently included females into the organization. Is anyone studying team building in this new context? I don't know if anyone's studying.
I don't either.
Yeah. That might be, so we typically study organizations or the workplace, and I would expect you might see people studying scouting who do more education type research or something like that. But yeah, I don't know if anyone. Thoughts on ways to increase underrepresented groups in STEM majors and fields? This is a big question that I think a lot of people are working to answer. And I think that the good news is that there are a lot of kind of levers to pull that we know will make a difference. But I think our area of expertise is in teamwork and in thinking about how teams play into these experiences. I think that something that we or that I'm interested in and that we've been kind of thinking about with these studies on team discrimination is thinking about how we can train teams and coach teams and lead teams to be more inclusive and supportive of women or individuals from kind of minoritized racial groups working in teams in STEM at the kind of college level or beyond in the workplace, and trying to kind of identify ways to reduce this exclusionary behavior and kind of promote these positive experiences that will keep people in STEM. But there are a lot of things. There is, increasing representation in leadership, for women, female mentorship, or for minoritized group members, same racial group member mentorship. There's stuff in elementary school about how STEM information is presented, and kind of presenting things more communally, things like that. So there's really a lot of interest in increasing underrepresented groups in STEM, but I think there's a lot of work to be done in a lot of different areas.
I think we're close to the end of our hour. We did have one comment here from Sylvia in the chat line about a university having a scholarship specifically for STEM. Well, just to mention again, SRUW does have a scholarship, but it's not designated for any particular area. The development office decides what area or what person is going to receive that scholarship. So maybe that's something we as an organization could think about, that we would like to let the development office know that we are interested in supporting a woman studying in the STEM area. It's just a thought I'm having as this program is going on. I would like to give a sincere thanks to Dr. Salas and to soon-to-be Dr. Traylor for speaking with us today. I find this whole topic fascinating myself because, as I put in the chat, my question, I worked for 33 years in a culture where teamwork was not valued. You were supposed to be a leader and take all the credit for yourself. And if you acknowledge that anybody else had helped you on a project, that was bad. So, and it went so against my own feeling of what was right, but you have to live in the culture in which you work.
Yeah.
So I would like to see this teamwork culture invade my old profession. We'll see. I'd also like to thank all of you for attending today. I appreciate your spending an hour with us every week. I'd like to thank Karen Shipman, who coordinated today's program, and also Carrie Pius, again from the Rice Alumni Office. We couldn't do these programs without volunteers to coordinate these programs and without the help of the Rice Alumni Office. And I'd like to remind you that next week our speaker is Dr. Danielle King, who's going to talk on race, gender, resilience, and voice. And also, just to remind you, and for anyone who started late, if you are interested in being a member of SRUW, we encourage you to send an email to Piper or to me, or put a note in the chat line. We'll keep it open for a while. We will be having elections next week in our 12 to 12:30 segment. We will also be approving new bylaws, and to vote for officers and for the bylaws, you are supposed to be a SRUW member. It costs nothing to be a SRUW member. It's open to every person in the universe, male, female, Rice alumni, non-Rice alumni. We want you all, we welcome you all, but please ask to be a member. So just let us know and we'll get you the form to fill out, and then you'll go on our membership list. So once again, thank you to our speakers, and thank you to our coordinator and the Rice Alumni Office. And thank you to all of you for participating.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
See you next Monday, I hope.
Bye.